The whispers followed Dr. Eleanor Shaw like shadows as she hurried down the main street of Chico, California, in the spring of 1878. The small mining town, nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, had never seen a female physician before her arrival 6 months ago, and many residents still crossed to the other side of the dusty road when they saw her approaching. "Morning, Dr. Shaw," called Mrs. Peterson from the general store doorway, one of the few townsfolk who had accepted Eleanor's presence. "Don't you mind them gossips? My Tommy's fever broke last night just like you said it would." Eleanor smiled gratefully, adjusting her medical bag. "I'm glad to hear it. Keep giving him that willow bark tea for another day or two." As she continued toward her small office at the edge of town, Eleanor caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Unnatural for a woman to be cutting folks open. My cousin in Sacramento says women doctors are just glorified midwives. Heard she collects strange herbs by moonlight." At 32, Eleanor had grown accustomed to such talk. After graduating from the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania 7 years prior, she'd worked in Philadelphia until her father's death left her alone in the world. When she saw the advertisement seeking a doctor for the growing town of Chico, she had seized the opportunity for a fresh start. What she hadn't anticipated was the depth of superstition and mistrust that would greet her. The town's previous doctor had died suddenly, leaving a vacuum that the local barber had tried unsuccessfully to fill. When Eleanor arrived, presenting her credentials to Mayor Johnson, the initial relief quickly gave way to suspicion when the townspeople realized their new doctor was a woman. Eleanor unlocked the door to her modest office, which doubled as her home. The front room served as her examination area, with a small desk, medicine cabinet, and examination table. A door at the back led to her living quarters, a bedroom, kitchen, and small parlor. She had just hung up her shawl when a frantic knocking rattled her front door. "Dr. Shaw, Dr. Shaw." It was young Billy from the livery stable. "There's been an accident at the Turner Ranch. Mr. Buchanan's been thrown from his horse. They're bringing him in now." Eleanor's heart quickened. The Turner Ranch was the largest in the county, employing several cowboys to manage its sprawling cattle operation. She had yet to treat any of them, as most preferred to suffer through injuries rather than consult a woman doctor. "How bad is it?" she asked, already gathering supplies. "Don't rightly know, madam. Mr. Turner sent me to fetch you while they bring him to town. Said he's unconscious and bleeding something fierce." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing through possible injuries and treatments. "Tell them to bring him straight here. I'll be ready." Within 20 minutes, the sound of horses and a wagon announced their arrival. Eleanor stood in the doorway as 4 men carefully lifted an unconscious figure from the wagon bed. The injured man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair now matted with blood. "Put him on the examination table," she directed, her voice calm and professional despite the stares of mistrust from the cowboys. "Mr. Turner, I'll need to examine him immediately. The rest of you should wait outside." John Turner, the ranch owner, nodded grimly. "Do what you can, doctor." "This is my best ranch hand, Thomas Buchanan. Finest horseman I've ever seen until that new stallion threw him into a fence post." As the men filed out, Eleanor quickly assessed her patient. Thomas Buchanan appeared to be in his late 20s or early 30s, powerfully built, with a face that might have been handsome if not contorted in pain. A deep gash ran along his hairline, and his breathing was labored. She worked methodically, cleaning the head wound first, relieved to find it looked worse than it was. The real concern was his erratic breathing and the bruising spreading across his ribs. When she carefully cut away his shirt, she discovered extensive bruising on his right side. Mr. Buchanan. She called softly, checking his pupils. Can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes of startling blue before closing again. Eleanor continued her examination, finding several cracked ribs but thankfully no signs of internal bleeding. She cleaned and stitched his head wound, wrapped his ribs tightly, and administered a small dose of laudanum for the pain. When she emerged to speak with Turner and the waiting cowboys, their faces were masks of concern and suspicion. He has a concussion and several cracked ribs, but I believe he'll recover, she informed them. He needs to remain still for at least a few days. Moving him back to the ranch could worsen his injuries. Turner frowned. You suggesting he stay here with you? I have a spare room, Eleanor replied evenly. I can monitor his condition and ensure he doesn't develop pneumonia or other complications. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. No disrespect, doctor, said one of the cowboys, but Buchanan wouldn't take kindly to being laid up in a lady's house, especially one who. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Eleanor's spine stiffened. One who what exactly practices medicine? I assure you, my only interest is in seeing Mr. Buchanan recover. But if you prefer to risk his health rather than leave him in my care, that's your choice. Turner studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He stays, at least until he's conscious enough to raise hell about it himself. Pete, ride back and fetch some of his things. Doc Shaw, what do we owe you? After settling the matter of payment and sending the men away with instructions to return the following day, Eleanor returned to her patient. Thomas Buchanan remained unconscious, but his breathing had steadied somewhat. She gently bathed his face, noting the strong line of his jaw, the weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. Well, Mr. Buchanan, she murmured, it seems you're my guest for a while. I suspect neither of us is particularly happy about the arrangement. The following morning, Eleanor was checking Thomas's bandages when his eyes suddenly opened. For a moment, he stared at her in confusion, then attempted to sit up, only to fall back with a groan of pain. Easy, Eleanor cautioned, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've got cracked ribs and a nasty concussion. Who, he began, his voice a rough whisper. Where am I? I'm Dr. Eleanor Shaw. You're in my clinic in Chico. You were thrown from a horse yesterday at the Turner Ranch. Thomas's blue eyes widened. Doctor, you're a woman. Yes, I'm aware, Eleanor replied dryly. How's your vision? Any double images? He continued to stare at her, bewilderment evident on his face. My head's pounding something fierce, but I'm seeing just one of you, madam. That's plenty. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. Good. That's a positive sign. Are you experiencing any nausea? Dizziness? Both, he admitted, closing his eyes briefly. Feel like I've been trampled by a buffalo herd. You're not far off. Mr. Turner said the stallion threw you into a fence post. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Buchanan. Thomas, he corrected. Or Tom. Nobody calls me Mr. Buchanan except schoolmarms and undertakers. His eyes narrowed suddenly. You're that woman doctor, aren't you? The one folks in town have been talking about. Eleanor's face remained impassive. I'm the only doctor in Chico at present, yes. Now I need to check your pupils again. She leaned closer, using a small lamp to examine his eyes. Thomas remained still, though she could feel the tension in him. Your pupils are equal and reactive, she noted professionally. That's good. I'll prepare something for the pain and nausea. As she turned away, his hand caught her wrist. His grip was surprisingly gentle despite his obvious strength. Why are you helping me? He asked, his gaze direct. Most folks in town think well, they don't trust you. Eleanor carefully extracted her wrist from his grip. I'm a doctor, Mr. Buchanan. Helping the injured is what I do, regardless of what folks in town might think of me. She moved to her medicine cabinet, aware of his eyes following her. You'll need to stay here for at least a few days. Moving you now could cause further injury. In your house. He sounded scandalized. In my clinic, she corrected, which happens to be attached to my living quarters. I assure you, your reputation will survive. Thomas attempted to sit up again, grimacing with the effort. No offense, madam, but I can't stay here. It wouldn't be proper. Proper would be not aggravating your injuries and allowing your physician to treat you, Eleanor countered, gently but firmly pressing him back down. Mr. Turner has already agreed to the arrangement. Your clothes and personal items should arrive shortly. Before he could argue further, Eleanor mixed a powder into a glass of water and held it to his lips. Drink this. It will help with the pain. Thomas eyed the mixture suspiciously. What is it? Willow bark and valerian. Completely natural remedies, I assure you. After a moment's hesitation, he drank. Tastes awful. Most effective medicines do, Eleanor replied, taking the empty glass. Rest now. I'll check on you again in a few hours. Over the next 2 days, Thomas proved to be an increasingly difficult patient. As his strength returned, so did his determination to leave. Eleanor found herself constantly countering his arguments and insistences that he was fine enough to return to the ranch. The bleeding has stopped, and I can breathe without feeling like I'm being stabbed, he argued on the morning of the 3rd day. I've worked through worse. Eleanor, changing the bandage on his head wound, leveled a stern gaze at him. And that's precisely why men like you end up with chronic conditions that shorten their lives by decades. Your ribs need time to heal properly, or you risk puncturing a lung the next time you're thrown from a horse. I wasn't thrown, Thomas protested indignantly. That devil stallion bucked me off. There's a difference. The result seems remarkably similar, Eleanor observed, unable to suppress a small smile. Despite his complaints, she noticed that Thomas made no attempt to leave when she wasn't looking. In fact, when Pete and another cowboy from the Turner Ranch visited, he gave no indication he was planning an immediate return. Boss says take all the time you need, Pete informed him. That new stallion's been sold off to a buyer from Sacramento anyway. Good riddance, Thomas muttered. Always knew that horse had the devil in him. After the cowboys left, Eleanor brought Thomas a bowl of beef stew she'd prepared. As she helped him sit up against the pillows, she noticed him studying her face. Something wrong? She asked. Thomas accepted the bowl with a slight frown. Just trying to figure you out, Doc. You're not what I expected. And what did you expect? He shrugged, then winced at the movement. The way folks talk about you. I half expected some ancient crone with a wart on her nose, brewing potions and casting spells. Eleanor laughed, the sound surprising both of them. I'm sorry to disappoint. My potions are just standard medical compounds, and I've never cast a spell in my life. Why'd you come here? Thomas asked, his expression genuinely curious. A lady doctor could probably do better than Chico. Eleanor hesitated, then sat in the chair beside his bed. I wanted a fresh start. After my father died, there was nothing keeping me in Philadelphia. When I saw the advertisement for a doctor here, it seemed providential. And how's that working out for you? The question was asked without mockery, his blue eyes watching her intently. It's challenging, she admitted. Some patients are coming around. Others prefer to suffer rather than consult a woman physician. Thomas nodded slowly. Folks round here are set in their ways. Takes time to accept what's different. He paused, then added quietly, I know something about that myself. Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, he changed the subject. This stew's mighty good. You cook as well as you doctor. Hardly, Eleanor smiled. But I manage not to poison myself, which is achievement enough. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Thomas describing life on the Turner Ranch, Eleanor sharing stories of the more unusual medical cases she'd encountered in Philadelphia. For the first time since arriving in Chico, Eleanor found herself relaxing in someone's company, laughing freely at Thomas's dry humor and animated tales. Later that evening, as she prepared to retire to her own quarters, Thomas called her back. "Doc." His voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. "I owe you an apology." Eleanor turned, surprised. "For what?" "For being a difficult patient. And for believing some of what was said about you before I knew you." The sincerity in his face touched something in Eleanor she'd long kept guarded. "There's no need for apologies, Mr. Buchanan." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "Or Tom, and there is a need. Folks shouldn't judge what they don't understand." He paused. "Including me," Eleanor nodded, unexpectedly moved. "Thank you, Thomas. Good night." As she closed the door to her own room, Eleanor realized her heart was beating faster than normal. She told herself it was merely the unusual experience of having another person in her home after months of solitude. It certainly wasn't the way Thomas's blue eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how his deep voice had softened when he apologized. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor was preparing breakfast when an insistent knocking came at her door. Opening it, she found Martha Wilson, the town's most notorious gossip, standing on her porch with an expression of righteous indignation. "Dr. Shaw," she began without preamble, "I've come to express the town's concern about your situation." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "My situation?" "Having an unmarried man staying in your home," Martha clarified, trying to peer past Eleanor into the house. "It's causing talk, and as a member of the church committee, I felt it my Christian duty to address it directly." "How thoughtful," Eleanor replied, keeping her tone neutral. "However, Mr. Buchanan is not staying in my home as a guest, but as a patient in my clinic. There's a distinction." Martha sniffed disapprovingly. "Distinctions don't matter when reputation is concerned. A woman living alone with a man, is there a problem, Doc?" Thomas's voice called from inside. Before Eleanor could respond, Martha pushed past her into the clinic area, where Thomas was attempting to stand, one hand braced against the examination table for support. "Mr. Buchanan," Martha exclaimed, "I'm shocked to find you in such a compromising situation." Thomas straightened to his full height, his expression hardening. "The only thing compromised here is my ribs, Mrs. Wilson. Dr. Shaw saved my life and has been providing professional medical care, nothing more." "Nevertheless," Martha persisted, "people are talking." "For both your sakes, perhaps alternative arrangements, with all due respect, madam," Thomas interrupted, his voice deceptively gentle. "What people say doesn't concern me much. Never has. Dr. Shaw is a fine physician who deserves respect, not gossip." Eleanor stood transfixed, watching the exchange. Few people in town had ever defended her so directly. Martha's lips thinned to a tight line. "Well, I see you've been thoroughly influenced by Dr. Shaw's unconventional ways. When you return to your senses, Mr. Buchanan, remember that Christian society has standards for a reason." After Martha departed in a rustle of indignant skirts, Eleanor turned to Thomas with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You shouldn't have gotten up," she admonished, helping him back to the bed. "And you certainly didn't need to defend me." Thomas grimaced as he settled against the pillows. "That woman's tongue is sharper than any rattler's fang, and I only said what's true." Eleanor busied herself checking his bandages, avoiding his gaze. "Thank you nonetheless. It's rare for someone to speak up for me here." "Why do they call you a witch?" Thomas asked abruptly. "Is it just because you're a woman doctor, or is there more to it?" Eleanor's hands stilled. She considered deflecting the question, but found herself wanting to answer honestly. Partly because I'm a woman practicing medicine, which many consider unnatural, she explained. But also because I use herbal remedies alongside traditional treatments. My grandmother taught me about plants and their properties when I was a girl. In medical school, I found scientific basis for many of her folk remedies. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. My mother used herbs too, Cherokee blood on her side. She could heal just about anything with her plants and poultices. Eleanor looked up in surprise. Your mother was Cherokee? Half, Thomas confirmed. My father was an army officer who married her despite his family's objections. I grew up straddling two worlds, not quite fitting in either. His lips quirked in a half smile. So you see, Doc, I know something about being judged for who you are. The revelation created a new understanding between them. As the days passed, Thomas continued to recover and their conversations grew deeper. Eleanor found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she'd kept hidden for years, her struggles through medical school, the colleagues who refused to work with her, the loneliness of being always the outsider. Thomas, in turn, told her about his childhood on the frontier, his mixed heritage that made him an object of suspicion in both white and Cherokee communities, and eventually his finding a place for himself as a cowboy, where skill mattered more than ancestry. The ranch is the first place I've felt I truly belong, he admitted one evening as they shared dinner at the small table in Eleanor's kitchen. His condition had improved enough that he could move around carefully, though Eleanor still insisted he stay for observation. I understand that feeling, Eleanor replied. In Philadelphia, I was always the oddity, the woman doctor who didn't know her place. I thought coming west might offer more freedom, fewer preconceptions. Thomas chuckled softly. Might have been true a decade ago when civilization was thinner on the ground. Now the West is filling up with folks bringing their old prejudices with them. A disappointing discovery, Eleanor sighed. Not entirely, Thomas countered, his eyes meeting hers. Some of us out here value a person for what they can do, not who their parents were or what's expected. There was something in his gaze that made Eleanor's cheeks warm. She busied herself clearing the dishes, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar feelings his attention aroused. You should be able to return to the ranch soon, she said, changing the subject. Your ribs are healing well and the concussion symptoms have subsided. Was it her imagination, or did disappointment flicker across his face? Eager to be rid of me, Doc, he asked lightly. Of course not, she replied too quickly, then flustered, added, but I'm sure you're anxious to get back to your work. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her. Truth is, I've found the company here more agreeable than I expected. Before Eleanor could formulate a response, a violent pounding at the door interrupted them. She hurried to answer it, finding a panicked father holding a small boy who was struggling to breathe. Dr. Shaw, please help. It's Bobby, he's choking or something. The next hours were a blur as Eleanor fought to save the child's life. A severe case of croup had closed his airway, requiring her full attention and skill. To her surprise, Thomas proved an able assistant, fetching supplies, keeping water boiling for the steam treatments, and calming the frantic parents. Dawn was breaking when the crisis finally passed. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing regular while his exhausted parents dozed in chairs beside his bed. Eleanor stumbled to the kitchen, her energy depleted. Thomas wordlessly handed her a cup of coffee. You saved his life, he said quietly. Eleanor shook her head. It was close. If they'd waited any longer. But they didn't. They came to you despite all the talk. Thomas's expression was thoughtful. Maybe things are changing. 3 days later, Thomas was declared well enough to return to the Turner Ranch. As Pete arrived with a wagon to transport him, Eleanor felt an unexpected sense of loss. The clinic would seem empty without Thomas's presence, his deep laugh and thoughtful conversations. "Well, Doc," Thomas said as they stood on her porch, "I reckon this is goodbye for now." Eleanor nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Remember to avoid strenuous activity for another week, and if you experience any dizziness or difficulty breathing, return immediately." Thomas smiled down at her. "I'll be the most careful cowboy in California, I promise." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to call on you sometime if that would be acceptable." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Call on me as a patient?" "No, madam," Thomas replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "As a man calls on a woman he admires greatly." For once, words failed her. Before she could recover, Thomas tipped his hat and walked to the waiting wagon, moving carefully but steadily. Eleanor watched him go, conflicting emotions churning within her. Part of her thrilled at his interest, while another part, the practical, self-protective part, warned against the complications such a relationship would bring. The town already whispered about her. How much worse would it be if she became involved with a half-Cherokee cowboy? Yet as the wagon disappeared down the road, Eleanor found herself hoping he would indeed call on her again. The following weeks brought unexpected changes to Eleanor's life in Chico. The successful treatment of Bobby Miller during that desperate night seemed to mark a turning point in the town's attitude toward her. Mrs. Miller became a vocal advocate, telling anyone who would listen how Dr. Shaw saved my boy when no one else could have. Gradually, more patients began appearing at her door, first women and children, then eventually even some of the more progressive-minded men. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they grew less venomous, less ubiquitous. True to his word, Thomas called on her the Sunday following his return to the ranch. He arrived at her door in the afternoon, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, looking decidedly nervous. "Afternoon, Doc, I mean Dr. Shaw," he greeted, removing his hat. "I wondered if you might like to take a walk. It's a fine day." Eleanor, who had spent the morning half expecting, half dreading his appearance, found herself accepting before she could overthink the consequences. They walked along the creek that ran behind the town, a respectful distance between them as propriety demanded. Thomas told her about his return to ranch work, carefully modified to accommodate his healing ribs, while Eleanor shared news of her increasingly busy practice. "Seems folks are starting to recognize what they have in you," Thomas observed. "About time, if you ask me." "It's a beginning," Eleanor agreed cautiously. "Though I doubt Mrs. Wilson and her circle will ever approve of a woman doctor," Thomas chuckled. "Mrs. Wilson doesn't approve of most things invented after 1820, so you're in good company." Their Sunday walks became a regular occurrence over the next month. Eleanor found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation that both delighted and alarmed her. Thomas was unlike any man she had known before, direct yet gentle, intelligent despite his lack of formal education, and refreshingly respectful of her profession. On their fourth such outing, as they sat on a fallen log watching the creek flow by, Thomas suddenly asked, "Do you ever regret coming to Chico, Eleanor?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool spring breeze. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when the whispers are particularly vicious, or when someone refuses treatment rather than consult a woman. But then there are moments saving Bobby Miller, delivering the Jacobson twins safely, that make it all worthwhile." Thomas nodded, his gaze on the flowing water. "Life's full of hard choices. Seems to me the right path usually ain't the easiest one." "Is that cowboy philosophy?" she teased gently. "Nah," he smiled. "Just something my mother used to say. She chose a hard path when she married my father, but she never regretted it." He turned to face Eleanor, his expression suddenly serious. Sometimes the risk is worth taking if what you might gain matters enough. Eleanor's heart beat faster at the intensity in his blue eyes. She knew he wasn't just speaking about career choices anymore. "Thomas," she began hesitantly, "we should be realistic about whatever this is between us. The town is just beginning to accept me as a physician. If I were to become involved with a half-breed cowboy," he finished for her, no bitterness in his tone, merely a statement of fact. "I was going to say anyone," Eleanor corrected. "But yes, your heritage would make things even more complicated in some people's eyes." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused against her smoother skin. "Eleanor, I've spent my whole life being judged for what I am, not who I am. I reckon you understand that better than most." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I'm not asking for any decisions today, just asking if you might consider the possibility of us, despite the complications." Looking into his earnest face, Eleanor felt years of protective walls beginning to crumble. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons to pull her hand away and establish proper boundaries. Instead, she found herself replying, "I'm already considering it more than I should." Thomas's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. They sat there by the creek a while longer, hands joined, speaking of lighter matters, but both aware that something significant had shifted between them. The following week brought an unexpected crisis that would test their emerging relationship. Thomas arrived at Eleanor's clinic late one evening, his face tight with worry. "Eleanor, there's sickness at the ranch," he explained urgently. "Started with one of the hands 3 days ago, high fever, cough, terrible pain in the chest. Now 5 others have fallen ill, including John Turner himself." Eleanor immediately began packing her medical bag. "It sounds like it could be pneumonia, possibly spreading through the bunkhouse. I'll need to examine them." Thomas looked relieved. "I brought the wagon. Some of the men didn't want me to fetch. You said they'd rather take their chances than be treated by a—" He trailed off uncomfortably. "A witch," Eleanor finished, her tone matter of fact. "I told them they could choose between their foolish pride or their lives," Thomas said grimly. "John Turner overruled them anyway, before he took ill himself." The journey to the Turner ranch took nearly an hour in the darkness. Eleanor used the time to question Thomas about the symptoms, formulating possible diagnoses and treatment plans. When they arrived, the scene was worse than she had expected. The bunkhouse had been converted into a makeshift infirmary, with 7 men in various stages of the illness. The air was thick with the sound of coughing and the smell of sickness. Mrs. Turner, a practical woman in her 50s, was attempting to care for them all, her face drawn with fatigue. "Dr. Shaw," she greeted with evident relief. "I've never been so glad to see anyone in my life. John's in the worst shape in our bedroom in the main house." Eleanor worked through the night, moving from patient to patient. The illness was indeed pneumonia, spreading rapidly in the close quarters of the bunkhouse. She directed the separation of the sick, from the healthy, prescribed treatments of mustard plasters, steam inhalations, and herbal teas to ease the congestion and reduce fevers. John Turner was indeed the most critical case. By morning, Eleanor had done all she could for him and the others, but knew the next 48 hours would be crucial. "I need to stay," she told Thomas as dawn broke. "At least until the crisis passes. Mr. Turner especially needs constant monitoring." Thomas nodded, his own exhaustion evident after assisting her through the night. "I'll ride into town. Let folks know where you are. Anything you need me to bring back." Eleanor listed several medicines and supplies from her clinic. As Thomas prepared to leave, Their eyes met in silent understanding. Both knew that her decision to remain at the ranch indefinitely would fuel the town's gossip mill. Yet neither hesitated. The next 2 days blurred together as Eleanor fought to save her patients. 2 of the ranch hands improved quickly under her care, but 3 others, including John Turner, hovered between recovery and decline. Thomas returned from town with the requested supplies and stayed by Eleanor's side, helping administer treatments and ensuring she ate and rested when possible. On the evening of the 3rd day, John Turner's fever finally broke. Eleanor, checking his pulse as he slept more peacefully than he had in days, nearly wept with relief. The worst seemed to have passed for all the patients. Mrs. Turner insisted that Eleanor take proper rest in the ranch's guest room. Too exhausted to argue, she allowed Thomas to escort her there. "You're incredible," he told her quietly as they stood outside the bedroom door. "I've never seen anyone fight so hard for people, especially ones who might not even appreciate it." Eleanor's usual professional reserve had worn thin with fatigue. "I didn't become a doctor for appreciation," she said softly. "I did it because I couldn't imagine doing anything else with my life." Thomas reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "Get some rest. I'll wake you if you're needed." Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor lay awake for some time, her skin still tingling where his fingers had touched her. The intimacy of working alongside Thomas during this crisis had deepened her feelings for him in ways she couldn't ignore. They had functioned as partners, anticipating each other's needs, communicating sometimes without words. It frightened her how natural it felt. When Eleanor returned to Chico a week later, after ensuring all the patients at the Turner Ranch were recovering properly, she found the town's attitude toward her had shifted once again. Word of her successful treatment of the pneumonia outbreak had spread, along with John Turner's vocal endorsement of her skills. "Saved my life and the lives of my men," he reportedly announced in the saloon. "Don't care if she's a woman, an Indian, or a purple-spotted mountain lion doctor. Shaw knows her medicine." Coming from one of the most respected men in the county, such praise carried significant weight. Eleanor's practice grew busier still, with even some of her former detractors reluctantly seeking her services. Yet along with the professional acceptance came increased scrutiny of her personal life, particularly her relationship with Thomas. Their time together at the Turner Ranch had not gone unnoticed, and Martha Wilson's circle had begun a new campaign of whispers about unnatural attachments and questionable morals. Eleanor tried to maintain proper distance, limiting her interactions with Thomas to professional settings or chaperoned walks in public places. But the connection between them had grown too strong to deny. When Thomas spoke of his feelings for her, no longer hinting but stating plainly that he was falling in love, Eleanor found herself unable to push him away as prudence demanded. "I know what we're facing," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch swing, carefully visible to any passerby. "The town might never fully accept us together. My own people might not either, but I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Eleanor. It would complicate everything," she whispered, even as her heart urged her to reach for him. "My practice, your position at the ranch." "Life's already complicated," Thomas replied, his gaze steady. "Question is whether we face it alone or together." Before Eleanor could respond, fate intervened in the form of a terrible accident at the lumber mill on the edge of town. A messenger boy arrived, breathless, interrupting their conversation with news that several men had been injured when machinery malfunctioned. The next hours were consumed with emergency surgeries and treatments. Eleanor worked tirelessly, saving 2 men who would certainly have died without immediate medical attention. Thomas remained by her side throughout, assisting without being asked, providing steady support during the most difficult moments. When the crisis finally passed near dawn, Eleanor found herself alone with Thomas in her clinic, the last patient having been taken home by relieved family members. "You should go," she told him, though every fiber of her being wished he would stay. "It's late, and people will talk." Thomas stepped closer, his expression determined. "Eleanor, people are already talking, they always will. But today I watched you save men who once crossed the street to avoid you. I watched you pour everything you have into helping others without a thought for yourself." He took her hands in his. "I'm done pretending I'm not in love with you, done worrying about what others think." Eleanor looked up at him, her professional composure finally cracking. "I've spent my entire adult life proving I don't need anyone," she admitted. "Proving I can stand alone, but with you, Thomas. I don't want to stand alone anymore." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. All the arguments against their relationship still existed, but in that moment, they seemed insignificant compared to the rightness of being in his arms. The following Sunday, Thomas accompanied Eleanor to church, a bold public statement of their relationship that set tongues wagging throughout the congregation. As they walked together down the center aisle, Eleanor held her head high, though her stomach churned with anxiety. They sat together in a pew near the back, aware of the stares and whispers. After the service, several people pointedly avoided them, while others offered cautious greetings. Martha Wilson made a show of gathering her skirts as she passed, as though their very presence might contaminate her. "Well, that wasn't so terrible," Thomas murmured as they left the church. "No one fainted or called for an exorcism." Eleanor couldn't help but laugh, some of her tension easing. "Give them time. The day is young." To their surprise, John and Mrs. Turner approached them on the church steps. "Dr. Shaw, Buchanan," Turner greeted them warmly. "Martha's organizing a church picnic next Sunday. Sarah and I would be pleased if you'd join our family's table." The invitation, a public acknowledgement and acceptance from one of the town's leading families, was significant. Eleanor glanced at Thomas, who nodded slightly. "We'd be honored," she replied, her voice steady despite her emotion. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor and Thomas's relationship continued to evolve. They faced opposition. Certainly anonymous notes left at Eleanor's clinic warning her about race mixing, patients who stopped coming to her, derogatory comments muttered just loudly enough to be overheard. Yet for every person who rejected them, another seemed to accept or at least tolerate their relationship. The most unexpected support came from Bobby Miller, the young boy Eleanor had saved from croup, and his family. When Bobby's grandmother expressed horror at Dr. Shaw taking up with that half-breed cowboy, Mrs. Miller had reportedly replied, "That witch saved my son's life when he couldn't breathe, and that half-breed helped her do it. They can court whoever they please, and they'll always be welcome in this house." By midsummer, Thomas had asked Eleanor to marry him, presenting her with a simple silver ring that had belonged to his Cherokee grandmother. "I can't promise it will be easy," he told her as they sat by the creek where they had first acknowledged their feelings. "But I can promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to respect your work as part of who you are, and to love you for all my days." Eleanor, looking into his earnest blue eyes, found the decision surprisingly easy. "Yes," she said simply, holding out her hand for the ring. They married in August of 1878, in a small ceremony performed by the town's minister. John and Sarah Turner stood as witnesses, along with a few other friends who had accepted their relationship. Though many in town declined to attend, enough came to fill the small church patients whose lives Eleanor had saved. cowboys who respected Thomas's skill and character, and those simply curious enough to overcome their prejudice. Thomas moved into Eleanor's home, adding a room to separate her clinic more distinctly from their living quarters. He continued working at the Turner Ranch, though John eventually offered him a position as foreman, recognizing his natural leadership abilities. Eleanor's practice thrived despite the lingering disapproval from some quarters. When she discovered she was expecting their first child the following spring, she worried briefly about how it would affect her professional standing. To her relief, most patients seemed to separate her personal life from her medical expertise, continuing to seek her care even as her pregnancy advanced. Their son, James Turner Buchanan, was born in the winter of 1879, with Sarah Turner acting as midwife while Thomas paced nervously outside the bedroom door. When he was finally allowed in to see his wife and newborn son, the look of wonder on his face as he cradled the tiny infant brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, touching the baby's small hand. "Look at him, Eleanor. A new beginning." Looking at her husband and son, Eleanor felt a contentment she had never imagined possible when she'd first arrived in Chico. The path had been difficult, strewn with prejudice and misunderstanding, but it had led her here to this man, this child, this life that combined her calling as a healer with the deep love she had found. 2 years later, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, Maria Elizabeth, named for Thomas's Cherokee mother and Eleanor's own. By then, the scandal of their marriage had largely faded into acceptance, if not universal approval. New controversies and gossip had replaced them as the town's primary subjects of discussion. Eleanor continued practicing medicine, though she now limited her house calls and maintained more regular hours to balance her professional and family responsibilities. Thomas proved an equal partner in parenting, taking the children with him to the ranch when Eleanor had patients, reading to them in the evenings, teaching James to ride almost before he could walk. In the summer of 1885, 7 years after they had first met, Eleanor and Thomas sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard with the Turner grandchildren who had become their closest friends. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked, echoing the question he had posed during their courtship. Coming to Chico, marrying a troublemaking cowboy, Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Not for a moment, though I still maintain you became ill on purpose just to meet me." Thomas laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been when she first heard it. "Guilty as charged, Doc. Best decision I ever made, getting thrown by that devil stallion." "And to think," Eleanor mused, "if the good people of Chico hadn't been so convinced I was a witch, you might never have been brought to my door." "Then I'd say their superstition was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me," Thomas replied, bending to kiss her lightly. As twilight settled over the small town that had become truly home, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The whispers would never completely cease. She would always be the woman doctor who married the half-Cherokee cowboy, a curiosity in some eyes, a scandal in others. Yet she had found her place in this community, earned respect for her skills, and built a family with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. The path had not been easy, but as Thomas had once said, the right path rarely was. And as she watched her children's laughter in the gathering dusk, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worthwhile. Sometimes healing required more than medicine. It required courage to stand against prejudice, strength to forge one's own way, and the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared in the most unexpected places.